Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel and welcome to episode 2 of Shelf Control. This time around I've decided to use a random color generator to pick my TBR because I thought that would be a fun one for Pride Month since we have the rainbow flag and I thought that would be like a fun tie-in. I'm also hoping to generally read queer books if I can manage it. That said, if I can't because of colors, we'll just make it work, and I am planning to read several queer books this month anyway, but hopefully I can try to work that in as well. I'm actually refilming this though because I previously filmed this and then I filmed my June TBR and was like, hey, I've already picked the books for this. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but I've already picked them. And then I realized that I was looking where I had screenshotted the colors that I had gotten, and I went back and looked at them like the next day in better lighting because I filmed it in the evening, and realized that none of the colors that I had picked actually matched what I had picked for the books because I had misrecognized the colors in the bad lighting. So we're refilming it. We're going to repick the TBR with hopefully more success, and I'm using this random color generator that I found that I used to use for TBR Betrayal way back when I used to play that. I rarely got to use it for that, so I thought this was also a fun way to work that in, just because I always thought it would be a fun way to pick books. So I'm just going to go ahead and click this link here, and we will start picking. I think I'm going to do 3 for this video. So we have this kind of, it looks really purple on camera, but it's kind of a dark plum. I will edit in a picture of it. So first color is this kind of dark plum. I'm going to screenshot that for later. And we're just going to reload this page 2 more times. That seems to be the easiest way to get a new color. So let's get it to, there we go. Okay, that's a really, like, look at it in the good lighting here. Yeah, okay, that is a really pale green. I think it looks even paler on camera, but this is kind of a pastel green. Screenshot for later. And one more time. Come on, there we go. Orange. What I love about this is my 3 favorite colors are purple, green, and orange. It's like Halloween colors. So that works out. And it looks really bright on here, but this is more of a like burnt orange on my screen. So we have a dark plum, pastel green, and burnt orange. Those are going to be fun to find books for. I think it's going to be a little challenging, but I will be back later with some books. It took me a few minutes, but by some miracle, I did manage to find a book for every color. So for our first color, that plum color, I've chosen The Prison Healer by Lynette Noni. This is a YA fantasy book that's been on my shelves for quite a while. I think this was either Fairy Loot or Illumicrate. I had subscription boxes for a little while, but ended up canceling them because I wasn't having much luck with them. This one's been sitting around. I've been meaning to get to it, and it was actually on my May TBR, and I didn't read it then. So I feel like this is just giving it another chance for me to actually get it into my read pile. But this one is following a young woman who is the prison healer at this notorious prison, and she is, I believe, trapped in the prison for some reason, but she is there when a rebel queen is brought in, and the queen is given the opportunity to complete a series of trials in order to gain her freedom and have her record wiped clean, but the queen herself is in a very bad condition, and the healer receives a mysterious note telling her to keep the queen alive. It sounds really interesting. I'm not normally a fan of trials, but usually my issue is that they feel like they don't make sense in the context of the world. They're just there as a plot device, and I'm hopeful that in this case, because it's a part of a prison complex, and it's like clearly meant to be a little bit fucked up, I'm hoping that I'll feel more like it is integrated into the world a little bit more, like it makes sense within the context of the world, and hopefully I'll end up enjoying this one a little bit more. So then for our green, I was trying to figure out what to do because I actually just read the one book on my shelf that I had that was like the perfect shade of pastel green, which was First Become Ashes. Read that one in May, but then I realized I do have the Southern Book Club's Guide to Selling Vampires, which is not green on its cover, but is green on the binding, and it is almost exactly the same shade of pastel green. So we're going with this one because it's the closest thing that I have. And this one is another one that's been languishing on my shelves for a while. My partner gifted me this one, and I've been meaning to get to it and just hadn't. But from what I've heard, this is generally people's favorite Grady Hendrix book, and I've previously read the Final Girl Support Group and enjoyed it okay, so I'm hopeful that I'll like this one better. Finally, we have the orange, which this one I had trouble with because I actually do have quite a few orange books. You can see some of them right here behind me. Also have hiccups apparently, geez. I also have the Poppy War on this side. I have several of these, but a lot of them were just too bright orange, and the few that had a slightly darker orange tended to be like a really, really dark orange. verging towards brown. So I decided to pick the one that I felt like was the closest, and it just happens to be the one that I'm also the most excited to read. This is Little Rot by Akwaeke Emezi. This one is one that my partner gifted me as well. He gave me this one last year for our anniversary. We were on a trip together, went into a little local bookstore, and he bought this one for me there. So I've been meaning to read this one as well, and I've been wanting to try something from Akwaeke Emezi for a while. I've heard great things about their writing, and I've been wanting to give it a shot. But I also just received this comment from @LibraryHo, which, by the way, great username. But they commented and said that this was a book that they read in one sitting, and it was really dark and intense, but really fascinating. So convinced me that I needed to pick it up ASAP, and so I was really hoping to fit this on the TBR this month, and this just worked out perfectly, that this was the closest I had to that kind of burnt orange color. Also, it has that same pastel green on it, which I think is fun. So these are the 3 books I'm going to be reading in this vlog, and I feel like this is very doable. These are books that for the most part I'm pretty excited about. I'm intrigued to see how I end up feeling about these 2, and I'm really curious to see how I feel about Akwaeke Emezi's writing. So I think it's going to be a really fun vlog, and I'm going to go ahead and dive in. Not today, but probably tomorrow. I'm trying to finish an arc at the moment that comes out tomorrow. So hopefully that'll be done, and we can leap straight into these and have some shelf control, because it's been a while since I've managed to make a dent in my read books, unread books, I should say. I decided to kick things off with Little Rot by Akwaeke Emezi. I think this was the one I was the most excited to pick up, partially because the description sounded really great, partially because of the recommendation from LibraryHo, and also partially because I just love the color scheme of this book. It's all of my favorite colors in one. So there were a lot of things running in this book's favor, and so far it is absolutely living up to my expectations. It's really interesting, and I wasn't really sure what to expect going in, but this is definitely more on the literary side than I was anticipating. It sounds a lot like a thriller based on the little description on the flap, which I'm currently using as my bookmark. It sounds a lot more like a thriller, but I would say that it's leaning more in a literary direction, but in a way that I'm really enjoying. This is a really interesting story because we're following this couple, Emma and Kalu, who have just broken up. They've been together for 4 years, and they've just broken up. They've kind of grown apart. They've had this tension rising in their relationship because of their differing views on like marriage and what it means or what they need to live a good life. And so they've just broken up, and they both are going off to do different things to try and like deal with the pain of that breakup. And Kalu ends up doing something at a sex party that he goes to that is being hosted by his best friend. He does something that then sends them all on a path towards like danger. And at the same time, these 2 sex workers show up on the scene, who I think one of them has interacted with one of the other characters before, from what I can tell. I don't know who yet, that hasn't been revealed, but it seems like one of the 2 women has interacted with one of our other characters at some point, like several years prior, and so they get pulled into the mess. And at this point, I'm not really sure like where we're going. I'm not sure what the danger is or the threat is to these characters, but there is this like dark looming feeling throughout the story, like you know something is coming, but it's just not clear yet what that thing is going to be, what it is that's going to be looming over all of them throughout the rest of the book. So at 100 pages in, I think I've met most of the characters, and I really enjoy all of them. They all have these very like messy, complex internal lives, and I'm enjoying how well-rounded and believable they feel, even as they're dealing with some like very unusual situations. And I feel like that's all I can really say at this point, because I really have no clue where the plot's going. I just am really fascinated by all of the characters. I really feel for all of them, and I think they're all really intriguing, and I want to know more about them, and I want to know what's going to happen to them. So yeah, I'm really glad I picked this up. I'm having a great time, looking forward to finishing it, and I totally see what @LibraryHo said about it being like read in one sitting kind of book. I haven't had the time to read it in one sitting because I've been doing Rainbow Rap Parade this week, and I've also just been super busy with work. But when I am sitting down to read it, I find myself just like wanting to continue, and when I'm not reading it, I feel myself wanting to pick it up. So it's definitely like very engaging, and it's doing a great job of like keeping my attention. So looking forward to reading the rest of this, hoping I can get through it this week. I think that's my goal. I'm still doing Rap Parade for a couple more days, and then we have company coming. So what I'm trying to do is finish this before company gets here, so that I'm not having to set it aside for a week and trying to read it while they're here. So that's where we're at. I'm gonna try and finish it. I probably won't check in again until I finished it, just because I feel like it's so literary. There's not much plot-wise to talk about. But yeah, really glad I picked this one up, and I'll be back with my final thoughts. So it might be clear from the background that I'm currently visiting my mom. This is my old office. I'm visiting her while my partner's on a work trip because the apartment gets awfully quiet and lonely when I'm there by myself. So I drove over, I'm hanging out with her, and that means that I've had a lot of reading time, which means I have also finished Little Rot by Akwaeke Emezi, and I have to say that I really enjoyed this. I'm gonna give this 4.5 stars instead of 5. I've had some time to kind of reflect on it. I actually finished this a couple of days ago, and I just kind of wanted to think about it for a bit before I reviewed it. I really enjoyed the story of this. It's got a lot of pieces in it that I think in the hands of a different author would have been just like a straight thriller, but this was much more literary. This was about the characters and the ways they were coping with what was happening to them, the ripple effects that their decisions were having throughout kind of a network of relationships, and I just found that super interesting. I really liked all of the characters. They were all really like complex, messy people just trying their best in the midst of everything that was happening, and I liked that I couldn't necessarily say that anyone was like wholly good or wholly bad. I think there was a lot of like nuance to every character and their motivations. So I really enjoyed this. The story is essentially following this couple that breaks up, and they both make decisions kind of in the wake of that breakup as they're trying to like seek a distraction from their grief over it. And some of those decisions result in major consequences for themselves and also for the other people in their friend group network. So I just thought it was really interesting. I really enjoyed it. I don't want to like spoil anything for anybody who might want to read it, but I will say the reason it's a 4.5 instead of a 5 is that there's one character that I really liked who I think gets some interesting ideas set up for her kind of early on. It's one of the two members of this couple, Emma. She gets kind of sidelined from the middle of the book. She's really important for like the first 80-ish pages, and then she just disappears for 100 pages, shows back up to kind of wring her hands over something, and then disappears again. So I just felt like she was underutilized. I thought she was a really interesting character, and the dilemmas that she was encountering were really interesting, but she was just not really a part of the major plot, and so she just didn't show up very much. And so I really wanted to know more about Emma. I wanted to see more of how she was grappling with everything. So I feel like she was kind of underused in the story. This also has, just as a heads up, a very like ambiguous, I would say unsatisfying ending. And I think it's kind of the point. This was something that I felt like I needed to think about before I reviewed the book, because I think I came away initially feeling very like frustrated and unhappy with the ending, but after kind of reflecting on it for a while and talking through the book with a friend of mine, I realized that that is probably part of the point of the book, and for that reason I think it's pretty well executed. I think you're supposed to be left in this kind of gray area in the end of the story, so I think it was really well done. I think Akwaeke Emezi accomplished what they were trying to accomplish with this book, and I definitely will be reading more from them. This was just a really interesting reading experience. So after I finished that, and apologies I keep having to switch arms because I don't have a good place to set this camera and my arms are getting tired, but after I finished Little Rot, I then have also started the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. I remember that the last Grady Hendrix I read took me a while to get through, and in fact was the reason that I completely canceled a different vlog. So I decided to go ahead and start this one just to try and get through it early, and I'm delighted to say I'm having a lot better time with this one than the previous Grady Hendrix book I read, which was The Final Girl Support Group, which I've generally heard is not people's favorite of his. But this one, I've generally heard is people's favorite of his. So I'm really enjoying this one. We're following this group of suburban moms. Specifically, we're following Patricia Campbell, and they have like formed a book club together. They have this really interesting friendship where they're not like super affectionate with each other. They're all very much like kind of, I wouldn't quite say standoffish, but there's like this sense of decorum and manners that keeps them from necessarily being totally open with each other. But I love the way that this friend group just totally shows up for each other. Like regardless of whether they say that they care about each other, when something goes wrong, they show up. And I really like that dynamic. I really like Patricia. I really like the things that she's dealing with and the way that she's dealing with them. This also hit pretty close to home because one of the elements of this story is that Patricia's mother-in-law has moved in with them, and she's experiencing dementia, so she's like sundowning and she's really struggling, and it's kind of affected her personality. She's gone from a fairly doting grandmother to pretty mean, and I found that really interesting because I don't think I've talked about this previously on my channel very much, but my grandmother used to live with us and she experienced dementia. She eventually moved in with my aunt for the later part of her life because my aunt worked from home and so could like provide her more care throughout the day. But you know, it's really interesting reading about this here because it's something that I have seen, I've experienced with an older family member going through that, and it is really difficult. So I think that helped me connect with Patricia, and I really like get what she's going through with that. And I just thought that was a really interesting element of the story, and I like the family dynamics that are being set up here. They're very like messy family dynamics. It's clear that it's not like a totally happy family, but I think that there are some interesting things happening with Patricia and her husband Carter and her two children, and just kind of the fact that like the children are growing older and her relationship to them is being tested in different ways. So all of that to say, I really like the social dynamics of this book, and I would say that they're very much at the forefront. I think they kind of impact the way the horror plays out because of the way that these people have been raised to behave in social situations, and that is what the person I think is supposed to be the antagonist is really like taking advantage of. Also, I just realized this clip might be really echoey because this room is really echoey. Apologies if that's true. I just realized I could hear myself echoing. But yeah, so the person who I believe is the antagonist is really kind of taking advantage of this sense of like social decorum and the way that people are expected to behave. This is very much like Housewives in the 80s. And he's really interesting because I think that he's ingraining himself in their lives in a really insidious way where like I'm as a reader seeing all the red flags, and Patricia is kind of talking herself out of seeing them, but in a way that is totally believable. Like you totally get why she's willing to go, oh, you know, I'm just being paranoid. I read a lot of true crime. Maybe this is not like really a problem. And so I really was interested in that. Sorry, cat hair tickling my face. I'm really interested in the way that that's playing out, and I'm excited to see where this is going. I'm just having a really good time reading this one. This is one where I've been wanting to pick it up just throughout the day. I keep wanting to read instead of having to do my responsibilities. Unfortunately, I do have responsibilities that have to come first, but I've managed to read about 150 pages. Is that where my bookmark is? Somewhere in there, close to that. I'm about page 150, so I'm just shy of the halfway point, and I'm just really having a great time. I'm excited to see where this is going to go. Also, I just realized we have a friend. I can hear him. He likes to attack my work bag when he can, and I moved it so it's in a new, exciting, interesting place. Is that fun, Elwood? It must be. So anyway, I'm gonna go do more of my responsibilities. It is actually Wednesday morning. I'm not sure what day it is anymore. It's a Wednesday morning, so I am working, but I just want to take a little break and fill y'all in on where my reading was at. And I'm looking forward to reading more of this, and hopefully we'll have some final thoughts soon. I'm back home, and I have finished the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and I'm gonna give this 4.5 stars, so a second 4.5 star of this video. I really enjoyed this much more than I thought I would, based on my enjoyment level of the Final Girl support group. I really loved the characters and the relationships between them. I thought all of the dynamics were really interesting. I also really liked the threat in this, and I think one of the things that stands out most for me in this book is that the vampire is scary. He is truly frightening. I think a lot of media lately has tended towards having like sexy vampires. Even if they are truly dangerous and scary in some ways, they tend to be like sexy first. And not all of them obviously, but like other vampire media I've consumed in the last little while. So I'm always really impressed when something that's a vampire story manages to actually scare me with its vampire, and especially if I already know which character is the vampire, which you definitely know kind of from the start in here. And this one was genuinely terrifying. He is so scary, and there were so many moments in here where I had to like set the book down because I was stressed for Patricia and her friends, or something like really disgusting or awful was happening and I just like needed a minute to process. There were so many like really frightening moments in this book, and I was just really pleasantly surprised. I really enjoyed that. I thought this was an interesting take on a vampire. We don't get all of the answers, and I think that's kind of intentional, that there's some things are kind of left unanswered about the vampire here and how he works and like why he's doing what he's doing. So I really thought that was interesting. I thought he was very scary, and I liked the way that Patricia and her friends really had to work for it to defeat him. So I really liked that. I enjoyed Patricia a lot. She's just so observant, and I liked how much of the story was about her refusing to be silent and refusing to allow others to lull her into complacency, where she's noticing a pattern and putting the pieces together and using her brain cells, and she was not going to let somebody else tell her that she shouldn't act on it based on like a fear of being ostracized or something along those lines. So I just really enjoyed this. I thought she was a great protagonist, and it does some things that I wasn't expecting. There were several things that happened here that where the book took a turn that I just was not expecting, particularly with like the timeline of how long it takes them to defeat the vampire in here. Also the ways that the friendships morph over time I thought was really interesting. That went some directions I wasn't expecting. And the horror in here again was just like really scary. So had a great time with this. Way better than I was anticipating. I also liked that it talked a little bit about like the devaluation of women's labor. There was some stuff about gentrification and racism, and I thought that there were some interesting themes to work into this. I would have liked it to go a little bit deeper on some of those, which is part of why I'm only giving this 4.5. The other reason is that I think the first few chapters, like the first part of the book, there's this writing quirk that Grady Hendrix relies on that really was grating on me when I was reading the first part. There's this thing where he's trying to emphasize the role of a housewife, because all of these characters are housewives, but like the sheer amount of work that they do, all of the many responsibilities they have. But for a while there, it's like at least once a page for like the first part, we're getting just a long list of tasks and responsibilities. And it was one of those things where I think as a device, it works well. It like gets across what he's trying to get across. But because it was reused over and over and over again, it started to just kind of drag for that first section. So those were my only real qualms with this book. I thought this was just really interesting. It's a really fun horror book, and I think that's part of why the horror is so effective, is that you're having a good time, you're enjoying the characters, and then something catches you off guard, and you're kind of flung into the dark part of the story. So I really enjoyed that, and I'm glad I picked this one up. I definitely want to read some more from Grady Hendrix and see if any of his other books hit for me the way that this one did. But yeah, I'm really glad that I finally got to this. So that was that. And now moving on to our final book, our purple book, we have The Prison Healer by Lynette Noni. This is the one I think I am the most likely to DNF of the three that I picked up. And I say that because this one is a YA fantasy that uses one of my least favorite plot devices. This one has a series of trials, or a kind of tournament thing, and I tend not to like that in books. And I think it's usually that most of the versions of that I've read, the purpose of the trials or games doesn't make sense. It's just, it doesn't feel like a natural, organic part of the world building. It feels like it's just there for the sake of having games or trials, and I'm a little concerned that this is how this is going to feel, because the concept here is that we're following a woman, Kiva, who is, I think she's 17 here, and she works as a healer in this infamous prison, and the prison has a policy where its most dangerous prisoners receive a series of trials, or receive an opportunity, not even really receive an opportunity, they are sentenced to complete a set of trials that are based on the 4 elements, and if they succeed, they go free. And I'm a little worried about that, because it doesn't really make sense to me why you would give your prisoners, who are your most dangerous, most concerning prisoners, a series of trials which, you know, they're not intended to survive them. But it is apparently possible, and if they survive, they go free. That just doesn't feel like a smart move on anyone's part here. So there's that aspect of it. The other thing is that I have actually already started reading this. I'm just a couple chapters in. Yeah, I'm on chapter 2. So I'm like 10 pages in. But one of the first things that gets brought up is the fact that, like, geographically speaking, this prison is like kind of in the middle of the continent that they're on. There's a place called Winderall, and it's on kind of the edge of the biggest kingdom of Winderall. There's 8 kingdoms, but it's on the edge of the biggest kingdom where it borders 2 other kingdoms. And Zalendov is a prison that all of the kingdoms use. And I feel like that is impractical at best and incredibly silly at worst. I feel like the idea that all of these different 8 kingdoms would send all of their most feared criminals to the same place just doesn't make a ton of sense. So, having some issues kind of initially with whether I'm going to enjoy the world building, and that will probably have an effect on whether I end up finishing this book. That said, the writing is pretty good so far. I like the setup for what's happening. I like our main character, where She's essentially functioning as a prison healer, as you would guess. She goes to the prison when she is very young, and it's now 10 years later, and she is serving as a prison healer, where her role is basically branding new people when they come in, and then healing people as needed while they're there. And it's an incredibly tough prison. There's lots of people being assigned to hard manual labor, so there's a lot of need for a healer. And at some point during the story, I haven't gotten to where this kicks off yet, but the little summary does tell me that a rebel queen is going to show up on the, let me restart what I was saying there. My brain lost its train of thought. What I was trying to get at is that in this summary, it tells me that there's going to be a rebel queen that will show up who is kind of on death's door, like she is not well, but she shows up and the main character is going to receive a note that basically tells her, like, keep her safe, we are coming. And so she's got to try and, like, protect the queen, and she's got to go through the series of trials that the queen has been sentenced to, and on her behalf, to ensure that she, like, survives. So that's the setup for this book. I know it was a little long-winded. It took me a little time to get there, a little ways to meander before we got to that point. But yeah, so that's the setup, and I'm just not convinced I'm going to end up liking that, because it is some of my least favorite kind of plot devices. There's also going to be some sort of love interest, and our main character as a prison healer is serving as sort of a spy for the warden as well, so she's kind of an unpopular figure in the prison as well. So it looks like it's going to be kind of complex. She's got a lot kind of pressures on her throughout the story. I'm hoping I'll end up liking it, but I would not be surprised if I ended up putting this one down. So we'll see. I'll let you know how I'm feeling when I get a little further in. But for now, we are starting in on our last book, and that feels a lot like progress. Okay, yeah, it's much later, and I only made it to page 22 or 23. I'm DNFing this. I can tell right from the start that it's very much not going to be for me. From the start, we're getting a lot of detail about very minor things that don't really seem to matter in the grand scheme of things, but we're not being given details that would make any of what's happening or any of the world building really make sense. We're told, like, right from the start, within the first few pages, that this is a, like, horrible torture prison, but also the warden doesn't tolerate abuse of the prisoners. But it happens anyway because they, like, hide it, but, like, the warden doesn't tolerate it, but it's a horrible torture prison. So that's kind of inconsistent. And then also we're told that this particular prison is used by all of the 8 kingdoms of this continent, which doesn't make any sense because clearly they would have different laws, and who's running it then? Like, who's in charge of the prison? Why does it exist? That's never explained, at least not in the first few pages, but it's just kind of like thrown out there as like a thing that happens, a thing about this world that just doesn't really make any sense. So there's that part of it. And then I still don't quite understand the idea of giving your most dangerous criminals a trial that might allow them to go free. Like, that, again, just doesn't really make any sense. So there's a lot of, like, world building stuff that feels like it wasn't thought through very well. And then at the character level and kind of the way that they're behaving, I really don't care for our main character. And in particular, what I didn't like that was happening is that the second chapter is the arrival of a character who is incredibly obviously the love interest, because he is described as, like, super hot from the start. And I didn't like that. And it felt gross because he's unconscious and they're just, like, ogling him, how attractive he is. And the author kept coming up with, like, a singular descriptor for every character. So, like, this character, this love interest character, has honeyed skin, whatever that means. And it just kept getting mentioned over and over again. And then there's a guard with amber colored eyes. And initially she's just called the guard with amber colored eyes, and she's clearly going to be significant. But then even after we learn her name, we keep getting reminded that she has amber colored eyes. And I just found it really repetitive and annoying, and a really shallow way of creating the characters. So I could tell I was not going to have a good time reading this, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut my losses here. So yeah, 2 really successful books, 1 major flop, but that's okay. I'm gonna pass this on to somebody else who will hopefully enjoy it more than I did. And that is pretty much all I have for you today. So quick summary: I read Little Rot, gave it 4.5 stars, read The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and gave it 4.5 stars, and now I've DNF'd The Prison Healer. And that is where we're gonna end things. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.